ControlNet is one of the most powerful stable diffusion tools. There are many preprocessors and models to choose from, but today let's talk about Canny. With Canny, you can change information within the image while retaining the overall composition or even facial likeness. Change colors, vibes, add additional subjects to an existing composition, even if it includes hands, and so much more. Let's break it down. If you have no idea what I'm talking about when I say ControlNet or how to install it, check out my ControlNet full guide. Link is in the description. It's an article that goes over what is ControlNet, how it works, how to install it, update it, add more ControlNet models, what all of those interface settings mean. So check it out if you need to. Now, what is Canny? Well, ControlNet Canny is a preprocessor and model for ControlNet. There is a more complicated explanation, but basically it detects edges and extracts outlines from your reference image so that you can then use them on your new images. Canny preprocessor analyzes the entire reference image and extracts its main outlines, which are often the results of sharp edges and changes in dark and light tones. If we zoom in a bit closer here, you'll be able to see exactly what I'm talking about. Look at the nose right there. There's a light there and it extracts that edge to indicate a change of plane or light. Canny will create outlines for the characters, background, foreground, and basically anything that's in this image, like the buildings in the background or the clouds that we can see in this example. By the way, there's also an article for ControlNet Canny. It's based on the video that you're watching right now, so you can read and follow along if you'd like. Now, quick Canny process. This is the simplest way to use ControlNet Canny, and more exciting ways are coming soon, so stay tuned. For a very simple workflow, here's the basics. You pick your model. I used Rev Animated. Now open up the ControlNet tab. If you don't have it, check out the article I mentioned previously. Drop your reference image, select Enable, and choose Canny. If you want to see Canny in action, check mark Allow Preview and run preprocessor, the exploding icon. You write a prompt like English lady, blonde hair, jewelry, period pieces, 1600s, yada yada. Add some negative prompt, choose your settings. Mine are shown here on the screen. Leave the other settings as they are for now and hit generate. Now, when Stable Diffusion generates an image, it has a guide to follow. Our Canny preprocessor created a guide that we just saw, and so Stable Diffusion has to follow that guide while also looking at the prompt. So we get a completely new image. Notice how the overall composition, the facial features remain the same or very similar to the original, but they're still being changed based on our prompt. And this is just a super easy and quick way to use Canny so you understand how it works. Now you might be wondering, can you use it for SDXL models? And the answer to that is yes. You have to download a different Canny model. I'm using DiffusionXL Canny Mid, but any from the link in the description will work. And after you download it, click the refresh button if you don't see it right away. But when you select Canny preprocessor, make sure in the model to select DiffusionXL instead of Control SD15. And then you'll be able to use ControlNet with SDXL checkpoints for some very lovely results. Maybe you've also noticed that ControlNet has two additional settings that are not present on the other preprocessors, and those are Canny Threshold. So the Canny low threshold is basically anything below that number gets discarded. And Canny high threshold, anything above the number you select, is always kept. Values in between low and high are either kept or discarded based on other mathematical factors that I won't be getting into. Notice how different the Canny edge outputs are and how much information is retained in each. But is it always necessarily better to have a higher amount of edges detected? Well, I think it depends. If you're using Canny to retain a specific composition, silhouette, or body pose, but want to create a unique image, then I'd go with the default or pixel perfect setting enabled. But if you're looking to retain a specific structure, for example, facial likeness, then a higher amount of details in the preprocessor preprocessor will probably produce better results. So from this example, notice how little resemblance to the original image is recreated with the threshold set to low 200 and high 250, because the guide that you're giving Stable Diffusion is very limited in its information. In comparison, the Canny Threshold low 10 and high 100 created the most detailed output, retaining the most facial likeness of the facial features. And we could have guessed that that would be the case based on the preprocessor result alone. Paying attention to these little details will allow you for even more control over your final generations. Now let's actually try to test some of these features and see how it works. So let's go to the Image to Image tab and check out what Canny can do for us. I found this image of a person holding a glass, and now I'm just gonna quickly select a few settings for the size and so on. But in the ControlNet Canny tab, you notice there's a new button that says Upload Independent Control Image. We're gonna get back to this, but for now we're just going to use the glass. Select Canny, change the denoising strength to something higher so it can really affect the image, and now write your prompt. For me, it's a hand holding a glass, flower growing inside a glass, blooming, photorealistic, digital painting masterpiece, high res. Now I want there to be a flower, but I want there to also be a hand and to retain this composition. We'll see how well it does. And so I generated the first one, and the result is something super tiny inside a glass. So that's really not helping us that much. I'm going to reuse the seed here so that when I make changes, I can actually tell if it affected the image in the way that I want. So now let's run one without ControlNet enabled, and we have a glass with a flower, but the hand is all messed up. So that's really not working for us here. Now let's enable it again with Canny control weight at 0.5 and image to image denoising strength at 0.75. I was able to get an interesting result. We retain the composition and we have a flower on the inside. It's a much better result than that without ControlNet. So if you have an image that you want to replicate specifically, especially when it comes to hands, then ControlNet Canny image to image will work pretty well. Now for the second example I wanted to show you, I first generated an AI image in Stable Diffusion. Then I picked the one I like and sent all of its parameters to the Image to Image tab. The reason we do it is to retain all the settings, the prompt, the seed, all of it. Then I enable ControlNet Canny and add to the prompt the color of her hair. And so it retains basically the same image. There's a few things that are different, of course, some facial features, some colors of the dress and surrounding areas, but mostly it is very, very close to the original. And if you play around more, you could probably get an even better result. Now, if we really want to get creative and create something very interesting, what we're going to do is we're going to change the image from image to image. So here I dropped a glass. But what is important to notice is that when we go down to Canny, we need to enable it and upload independent control image. That is the important part. And then we throw in our witch. But now from image to image with a denoising of 85, we have the hand with a glass. But at the bottom, we have the outline of a girl and we have the prompt of a girl. So when we begin generating, the image's colors and values and whatever else Stable Diffusion retains get applied on top of our generation. So here I started throwing in different kind of images, lowered the denoising value a little bit to 0.6 and started generating again. And now we're getting some really interesting results. We still get the same witch, the same composition, but colors, a vibe, and a lot of other details are very different. Now, this is totally something fun that you can play around with. Now, let me show you inpaint real quick. So we're going to throw in the same image to the inpaint tab. And let's say we wanted to change the color of the dress to red while retaining the overall design and shape of the dress. To make such a big color color change, we probably need to use a high denoising strength. I used 0.9. When I run this generation with masked only enabled, but without ControlNet, the color of the dress changes, but it no longer matches the rest of the body, and it's a new dress entirely. So instead, I enabled ControlNet Canny and got the dress to be more red, but with the same design, which is exactly what we wanted. And that's a pretty fun example, isn't it? Now, here's a few more things. First, you can play with the control weight. In this case, I dropped this image, kept all the same settings, but changed the prompt to a girl having silver hair and wearing a dress. If we change the control weight of Canny to 0.1, we basically have an entirely new image. 0.4, now we have more of a resemblance of the first image with quite a lot of changes nevertheless. And with 1, we are keeping the same composition exactly, just changing some other things. And that is something to play around with for your own purposes. Now, I think Canny is great for many creative uses, but my favorite is probably composition. I used a new prompt and a new checkpoint each single time, and it created a totally unique image while retaining the overall composition from the original Canny image. Even if the clouds become something else entirely, the shape of something there remains. Thanks to Canny. I hope you enjoyed this video. I am planning to make a series on ControlNet, so stay tuned for that. And hey, if you're still watching, check out this one next. Cheers!